Today I want to talk about how this tool helped me make over $50,000 and why I replaced it with this. Let's get into it. So when I first opened my shop 7 years ago, literally before I could even finish setting up my equipment, I got an inquiry from a local organization that was looking to have a very sculptural menorah built in my town. Now, for those of you that don't know, I actually have a background in art and sculpture. That's what I went to college for. So my name came up when the organization was looking for someone to build this menorah. Now, I drew something up that I conceived in my head and I thought would be possible, but I really didn't know how I was going to build it. I bought a tubing roller from Harbor Freight thinking that I could just basically do it by hand and roll the tube and just kind of gently make these curves that I had drawn on a piece of paper. I was very wrong, but what I did find out was that a company called Swag Offroad made an upgrade kit for the standard Harbor Freight roller with these wings on the side and an area up top to make a bottle jack. So I was able to get myself through that project. I was very proud of how it came out. And then after that, I wound up getting a lot of other work all using the tubing roller. I've made bike racks and roll cages. I've made chandeliers for lighting companies and tons of different things, all using this machine. That being said, it was never great. So with some upcoming projects, I decided to upgrade this machine. So I reached out to my friends over at Swag Offroad and they sent me this thing. So I'm gonna show you how I set this thing up, what a ring roller / tubing roller even does, and explain to you how I've been able to create kind of a niche market for myself to make lots of extra money using a tool that I never even thought I needed.
So a ring roller essentially makes rings. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this one needs a stand. I got the roller from Swag Offroad, like I mentioned, and I got this I-beam out of a scrapyard a couple of years ago. I'm going to cut it up using the metal circular saw, and this is going to be basically the table for this ring roller stand. Now, it is a little rusty because it's been sitting outside, so I de-rusted it with a wire wheel and got it all cleaned up so that this can add some rigidity to the basically top of this table / rolling assembly that I'm building. Now, originally I was going to cut this I-beam down into basically C-channel, but when I noticed how small the top and bottom flange were, I realized that actually it might work to my advantage to add accessories later. Stay tuned to the end and you'll see how I wound up adding some rollers, which is going to help me make full circles and honestly change the way that I use this machine. Once I got it on there, I kind of designed it on the fly, and I'm using an app on my phone called Trig Solver, which is a trigonometry app where you can add the height and the bottom of a triangle, and it'll tell you the angle and give you all the dimensions you need. So this is super helpful, and I use it all the time. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is building a super heavy-duty dolly as the base, and then making some angled legs that'll get up to the I-beam and help keep this thing nice and stable. When you're making rings and rolling curves, what you wind up having a problem with is you have to extend the material completely out past the center of the roller. So if you're rolling, let's say I have to make 60-inch rings, I use 18 feet of material. At some point, I have about 16 feet of material sticking out of one side of the ring roller. So having a nice wide base actually helps a lot to keep the roller from moving. And you can imagine that there can be a lot of tension and a lot of twist put into play if you don't have a really heavy sort of table for it to bolt to. Sometimes we'll actually clamp it to my welding table, but I want a way that I can roll it outside for some of those longer and larger pieces. I welded up the base out of some 1x3 leftover material that I had, and then I drew this extreme angle on this 2x2 tube using a speed square. I'm going to be cutting this with the metal circular saw again, and this is actually super convenient because if you've ever tried to cut an extreme angle like that on a bandsaw, it can be pretty difficult no matter what saw you have to get, in this case, a 14-degree angle cut. Now you can see how it's going to go together, and basically I can start to piece together these parts as I kind of cut them and use the first one I made as a guide to mark and cut the other two. So you might be asking why you'd want to have a ring roller in your shop. Well, a lot of shops that I've come across, a lot of small shops that don't already make railings, can't really make round stuff. People don't really have the ability to make curved shapes, make circles, make hoops. I've made chandeliers for lighting companies with my ring roller. All these different things can be kind of made possible by a really simple tool. Now, if you buy the regular Harbor Freight one for, I think, $250, immediately you're going to find that it's incredibly labor intensive to roll rings when you have to actually manually roll that big wheel and screw down the tension on the top. What you'll notice on the table here is there's a pipe threader sitting right in kind of the foreground. Now, the Swag Offroad system that I have on this and I had on the old ring roller uses a pipe threader as a drive motor in order to actually not have to do any, physically like rolling around of a giant wheel. It's super helpful, and once people find out that you can make curved things, honestly, that opened the door for me to do all this work, because people would see on my social media or on my YouTube that I was making round stuff or curved stuff, and I made benches out of stainless and, like I said, chandeliers. I made a bunch of stuff for my friend Anthony Panza, like the roll cage for the Banshee. I made the curved rail over the car. I've made rotating beds and art frames for people. And also, when I made the bed frame, which was a recent video, I had to make curved canopy pieces, and I would never have been able to get the curved pieces had I not had the ring roller. Once everything is cut up, I'm able to weld everything over to the beam, and I'm just basically making sure that everything's nice and well stitched so that I can have as much strength as possible. Now, as I mentioned, when you're rolling material, it can stick out and stick up pretty far, so I wanted to have big heavy-duty casters that would allow me to roll material outside. The only mistake I made here was I only got 2 locking casters, and later on, after I filmed this video, I went back with an angle grinder. I cut off these 2 ones that don't have locks, and I welded on ones with locks, because this thing rolls around so well that it rolls all over the place while you're trying to make rings. So once I got it down off the table, I cut these little sharp angles off, and then I'm going to go ahead and drill the holes to actually mount the machine to this piece of I-beam. Now, you might be asking why I didn't drill these holes beforehand. It was just a little faster and easier for me to go ahead and attack this with the mag drill after everything was put together. If you don't already have a magnetic drill and you do metal work, these things can be incredibly useful. In this case, this one's battery operated, so I can just bring it to the work. I've got a regular drill bit in there. I'm drilling a little bit larger than 3/8 hole, so I can use 3/8 hardware. And it only takes a couple minutes to drill these holes, and instead of having to move this whole thing around to a drill press. Once that was done, I took it outside and gave it a nice paint job, and then I made this little shelf to fit on the bottom. I'm going to be using basically a Home Depot storage tote to put all the dies and all the tools and parts I have for this, and that weight on the bottom is going to basically act as a ballast. So now you can see us giving it a test, and you'll notice on the closer side of the roller to us, there is a clamp on there. And you're going to see as this ring goes around that we're going to try to force that material past the clamp to keep it from hitting the side of the actual tool. Now, this is a problem that I had with my last one. When you try to make rings, you have to basically bend the material out, and you have to find some way to keep it from hitting the frame. Now, this works, but it's an imprecise system, and the clamp was scratching up the side of the tube, and that's not going to fly. I made a nice stand, and I want to make this thing as nice as possible. So I took that clamp off, and I designed a system where I would use this 1/2-inch wall chromoly tube and some 3/4 inch shaft and 3/4 inch bearings to basically make offset rollers that would keep things away from the digital readout and also allow me to have a really smooth action when I'm getting that tube around past the sort of 180 degree mark or 360 degree mark. I'm not really sure. Either way, since I had already painted this, I needed to grind a little bit of the paint off, and I made some marks with the soda nose of my grinder there so I knew where to weld these pieces of tube on. Now, this made me really happy that I didn't cut this into basically C-channel, but I did have to use a bunch of different blocks and a bunch of different jigging methods here to get these little pieces of tube to be straight up and down and perpendicular to the vertical web of the I-beam. You can basically see what I'm going for there once I get these tacked in place. And then I made sure to sink a lot of heat into these and make sure they were really well welded so that these things wouldn't have any ability to flex or bend. And I'll do a little more provisions to that a little bit further down the line. Now, I did order the wrong shaft material when I decided to do this, so I had to take 3/4 inch cold rolled bar and turn it down on the lathe, which definitely took a little more time than I wanted to, but it wound up getting me a shaft that had perfect clearance and was going to work out, except I did get a pretty crappy surface finish off my lathe. You can kind of understand what I'm going for here, and then once I drop those bearings on, you can see how the material would be able to roll against those bearings and keep from hitting the side of the frame. Now, in order to add another sort of layer of protection for the frame, I wanted to put some sort of a spacer between these shaft collars and the frame itself. So I drilled basically a press fit hole, and then I got some 1/2-inch stainless steel rod and put that inside the shaft collar as a little presser that would hit against the frame of the roller right about where that standoff is. So there wouldn't be any opportunity for the frame to get bent when there was an extreme amount of pressure on the side of it. I was going to weld this, but I wound up not having to because I got such a nice press fit from this drill. You get the point. These things are basically going to keep this thing from ever moving in without, affecting the frame, but nothing is welded to the roller itself, so I could always take it out of here pretty easily. Now, I put a shaft collar on the top and bottom, assuming that I was going to need that ability to move the wheels up, but after doing a little bit of work with this, I realized that they didn't need to move up, they actually needed to move down. Before I go ahead and do that, I grabbed some UHHM from my wood shop and I put some double stick tape, some VHB tape on it, just to act as little bumpers so no material would scratch the side of the tool. So like I said, I realized that these bearings actually needed to go a little bit lower, so what I did was I took the shaft collars off the bottom and then I drilled and tapped that 1/2-inch thick chromoly tube and threw a set screw in there to basically make those act as the shaft collars. This is going to just add a little more rigidity to this whole thing, and it's going to keep those bearings from lifting up as I'm rolling a ring. The ring is naturally curved, and it did want to push these up, and it was actually lifting the entire roller assembly, which was not good. So now with those done, I can do a test roll, and you can see the way these bearings work. So as I get around and start to create that curve, I'm watching the digital readout on this roller, and then once I have to pass the material past itself, you can see how easy it is for me to basically just push the material out, and then I can have it hit those bearings, and it'll roll right past the center line of the machine, and then I can check the radius with my radius gauge. The tool that I'm using to check the radius, I got from Trig Tools. It is a radius measuring tool. I have an inside radius and an outside radius tool. If you make curved pieces, you got to get these things. They're a little expensive, but they're worth every penny. This, coupled with the digital readout, allowed us to make over 100 rings in the exact diameter that we needed, give or take 1/8, which was within the tolerance. Overall, this tool is amazing. I'm really happy with the stand and the rollers, and this thing is going to help me make a lot of money.
All right, so clearly this is a massive upgrade if I'm gonna be continuing to roll tubing. I've got a project I'm working on at the moment where I have to make close to 100 steel rings, and they all have to be accurate within 1/8 of an inch. So the DRO, these rollers I put on the side, and then these radius gauges, which I showed earlier, are really gonna help me make this happen. I'll put a link to the Swag Hulk roller and all the other stuff that I showed in this video down in the description. Also, these radius gauges, if you make anything curved, even body panels, woodworking, these things, I never knew they existed. I have the inside gauge and the outside gauge. Absolutely worth the money if you do this kind of stuff. Anyway, shout out to Swag Offroad for hooking me up with this roller. It's an amazing tool. They make great stuff. Awesome customer service, so check them out. Check me out on Instagram right here at MakeEverythingShop. See you next time.